Hi, and welcome to the Team Deakins podcast. This podcast is a dialogue between Roger and James Deakins, often joined in the conversation by a guest. It's very informal, and we never know where it will go. We're connecting through Zoom, so bear that in mind when you hear the audio. If you'd like to submit a question or topic, please do so by emailing pod, P-O-D, at rogerdeakins.com. Today we're speaking with a cinematographer. Among his credits are Victoria, Rams, Wendy, and Another Round. We're pleased to welcome Sturla Brandt Gravlund with us today. Sturla, thank you for doing this.
Yes,
this is
thank
great.
you. Welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
We'd like to start with asking you how you got to where you are today. What was your path? Was this your original path, or did you think you wanted to do something else and then find it? And where did you grow up? Oh, tell us everything.
Well, I grew up in a small town in Norway, northern part of Norway called Trondheim. Grew up in the suburbs there in a sort of a very kind of safe and healthy environment with my parents and my brother and sister, older brother and sister. And I think I was a creative child. I guess all children are kind of creative, but I really like drawing, and my parents encouraged that. They're not from a artistic background. My parents are academics. And I think maybe it was that interest in drawing that kind of made me want to pursue some sort of artistic career. Or I started playing music quite young, playing in a band, and started playing around with the video camera that my father borrowed from his work, just doing small films with my friends. Nothing that I thought at any point would be a career. It was sort of just an extension of the kind of fantasy worlds that I was trying to express as a child, I think. Mm-hmm. And then in I guess call it junior high, and I had a film course and kind of got more introduced to more like the theoretical, practical parts of making film, like that it was a language maybe, and sort of was fascinated by that, and did more sort of media studies, and was sort of surrounding myself with all these creative inputs. And then I started a long road when I graduated high school to educate myself I didn't quite know what, but I was interested in film and radio, media, journalism, architecture. So I ended up doing some one-year courses. In Scandinavia, we have this kind of educational system called folk high schools. I don't know if you've heard about that, but it's...
No, tell us.
Yeah.
It's like a one-year program for young people that have just come out of high school, that maybe don't know exactly what they want to do, but have sort of an idea of a direction. And then you get to spend a year at a boarding school with fellow students. It's about 100 students, I guess, in these schools.
Wow.
And you get to try out different paths within your sort of interest, and that's supposed to give you a more clear idea of where you want to go. So I actually did 2 of those schools, and the one I did one in Denmark called the European Film College, which was absolutely fantastic. I know Charlotte Bruce went there as well, and I got interested in cinematography, and I actually also did a lot of sound design. So I was quite interested in that, and I thought at one point that I wanted to do become a sound designer, basically. But they rejected me at film school, so I I then took another path, which was art school, and I did a bachelor in fine arts, where I sort of found my, I guess, passion for photography and cinematography. And after art school, I went to film school for 4 years in Denmark.
Wow.
And then I graduated at 31, I think. So I did a lot of, it was a long
Oh my
road.
gosh. Wow.
Yeah.
It must have been terrifying to finally graduate because you'd been a student for so long. Now what do I do?
Exactly. I think it was, but I also think it was some sort of relief.
Yeah. That's a really interesting path.
Yeah. And so when you did graduate, what did you do? Did you know people by that time to work with, or what did you do?
Well, I guess during film school, I sort of got a network in Copenhagen. I came, from Norway and started to get to know people basically when I started film school in Copenhagen in the industry. But it's a fairly small industry there, so it's kind of and people are very generous. So I felt welcomed and that it was easy to get to know people. I found that in the beginning after my graduation that it was, the job opportunities were mostly in documentaries because documentaries, it's a big thing in Denmark. They produce a lot of really, really good documentary films there, and it has a high status. So, and it often, spans over a longer period of time. So they often the directors need more cinematographers involved. So I think I did that, different kind of documentary projects for 2 years before I got my first feature film.
When you were in school, did you have a lot of hands-on experience, or was it more theoretical?
No, film school was very hands-on.
Ah.
It's a Danish film school, and it's extremely hands-on. So the idea is that you're basically in this sort of experimental lab for 4 years, which means that you don't actually show your work before your graduation film to the outside world.
Wow.
Point being that you should dare to fail, and you shouldn't be concerned about what the industry is thinking about how you're developing as an artist. So it's very much an art school in that sense, I think.
So were you shooting as a film student? Were you shooting? You working as a cinematographer then, or were you making your own films?
You mean
like directing
in
them?
Film school?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. No. It's sort of built on that. There's 6 main sort of directions. So you work with a director, an editor, a producer, sound designer. So you kind of come together as groups and you sort of alternate. So you get to work with different people. Yeah. So it's like 6 students every second year. They to each direction. Yeah. So we're 6 cinematographers and so on.
Right. So you were basically specializing in cinematography for those 4 years.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. Could you have seen another way into the film industry if you hadn't have gone to the film school?
I think I kind of saw or think of film school as a shortcut to becoming a cinematographer. I think there's plenty of other directions getting into the industry in Scandinavia by working as a camera assistant or what have you. When I was in art school, I started working as a clapper loader on commercials and music videos and later a few feature films. And I think had I kind of stayed on that path, I would maybe, eventually have stepped up and gotten more work as a cinematographer. But it's probably a bit tougher. There's I think the film schools in Scandinavia have a very sort of high standing in the industry, so it's sort of a proof of professionalism or something, I guess.
Right, interesting. Yeah, it's just interesting how film schools now have that sort of ethos about them. I mean, when I go back to when I was leaving film school, it was not like that at all. Anyway, so when you left, you were doing documentary. What kind of documentaries did you work on?
All kinds of. I'm not sure if there was a specific type of documentaries. I did a documentary in New York called Songs for Alexis, which was kind of my first project where I was this, the main cinematographer together with the director, which was about a transgender teenager who's a musician and about his love life. And it was quite a beautiful experience.
I was meaning in terms of, were they scripted or were they kind of verite? I mean, I don't like that word, but were they,
right?
Were you in a situation that you had to follow and find
figure
the film?
out what the story was? Yeah.
In my case, I think all the documentaries I worked on was verite. I think there was, scripts and sort of an idea of a story, and then you kind of just, you tumble down the rabbit hole and you see where it takes you, and kind of, the story gets changed or formed as you go along.
Right. Do you think that had a real effect on the way you work on dramatic films? I do. I think absolutely. I think that was kind of in a way, a second film school for me. When I came out of art school, I had a very conceptual mind. I was trained in, art, like conceptual art in a way, and did a lot of, video installations. I was extremely inspired by Roy Andersson and his sort of, tableau. So I did a lot of that and trying, to create everything, every detail in the frame was, had a specific meaning, and really trying to shape again my fantasy world, and get more like a painter, like every brushstroke comes from me. And then I think there was a transition there in film school where we also work with documentary students. So I got an introduction to that, and the Danish film school also, coming from sort of the Danish dogma tradition, the handheld camera was introduced to me, and I think doing documentaries, I learned a lot about sort of finding the light and getting in touch with my intuition somehow. And I think that's still something, that has shaped me and how I like to work on narrative fiction films.
And when you did documentaries, did you go in later to the cutting room and see the shots that they did use and realize, we could have used this, sort of learned what kind of shots you needed to have in your head for the cut? Did you think that way?
I don't think I got into the cutting room, but I got, I usually have to offload the material myself. So I had all the material and maybe, I would cut things together myself and learn. And that's a great learning process as well to edit your own material. And I still, try to do that, get the dailies on a hard drive, and then I can cut, pieces together and see, I should have, need to be more aware of those kind of shots or whatever. Yeah.
And it's also a learning experience when you see the actual film that was cut by an editor and see the choices they made, and you go, oh yeah, that could work too.
Exactly. Yeah. That's always a completely different film than you imagine.
Yeah. Because I think a lot of times cinematographers, I have worked with some cinematographers who haven't been thinking about the cut so much. They've been thinking about the shots. And I do think that it's really important because I've been a script supervisor, so I'm always thinking about the cuts. But it's been great when I've worked with a cinematographer that's also thinking about it too.
Yeah.
Since they have the ability to help you.
I think what I experienced, because I was just shooting, so shooting is very fresh in my mind right now. So and I feel like there was, one day we were shooting and we're getting the shots that we needed, that we planned for the scene. And I think in those situations, I'm very much thinking about the shot. And then when the clock is ticking and you're not, you need to hurry up and get the scene, then there's something that kicks in where you're constantly editing and you're like, okay, we need this shot, and this shot. and it's almost just like a documentary. We just keep the camera rolling and run around, and then if I do this close up, then I can cut to that two shot, and suddenly it's just and try to count to 10 inside myself so I don't run away to the next shot too fast. Yeah, so there's definitely, I think that comes a lot from documentary filmmaking, or like thinking in those terms.
Yeah, I think most cinematographers have to think like that these days. I mean, I think the industry's changed. I remember when I was starting out, there were a lot of cinematographers in the UK. They didn't actually think like that, because they would work with an operator and the director would work with the operator. So in terms of blocking the shots, the lighting cameraman, as they were known then, was not so invested in the breakdown of the shots as the operator. But it's very different now, I feel, not just with streaming servers, but, that the whole system is changing, isn't it, really?
And I also think that you need to be aware of what you're shooting, because sometimes you're shooting something and the pace is a little slow, but it is what the actors are doing. But in my head, I always think, well, maybe if we have a cutaway, that's going to help them develop that kind of pace. So thinking about things like that, what options you can give to the editor without giving them every option, only because you don't have the time to do that. So picking the ones that work best.
Absolutely.
So tell us how you started shooting features then. How did that come about? Was it just a lucky break, or?
I think it was in a way. It was a director who's doing his second feature film in Denmark. It's a co-production with Germany, in Hamburg, actually, where I'm right now. And he was looking for a Norwegian cinematographer because they were trying to get money from Norway, and someone had worked with me on some music video and said, hey, Sturla is Norwegian, maybe you should look at what he's done. And he saw this music video and really loved it, and called me up for a meeting, and and we really, we connected, and the Norwegian financing fell through.
Wow.
But they still kept you.
But he still kept me. So
wasn't your fault.
What was the title of the film?
The title is, I think the American title is The 11th Hour.
Yeah, that film.
And it was a very low budget film and a fun experience. I think we had 4 weeks of shooting in Hamburg. Very limited crew. I didn't even have a gaffer. I think I was just putting up some lights myself. And
wow.
Yeah, it was. I think it was at one point the concept was that every crew member, including the editor, should fit in one bus, and we should just drive around and shoot this film. It kind of grew a little bit from that, but the idea was kind of
That's
nice.
a great concept.
I mean, we've started out like that a little bit in England early on, but
it always changes. Yeah. So, but Kim Basinger was in it, right? So you had a name in it. That must have been a little nerve-wracking.
It was at first, the idea of it was more nerve-wracking than actually, starting shooting. And then she's extremely professional and friendly and helpful. So it was that was quite easy. But it was my first film. But again, it didn't feel like a huge film. We were driving around in our bus, and then Kim Basinger would show up, and we will, we will do the shots. And it was a very also sort of a free and intuitively shot film, where we kind of followed our intuition and our instincts, and it came from a place of want rather than need or anything. So that was a nice experience. And on that film, Sebastian Schipper, who directed Victoria, he was an actor in that film. So that's how I met him and kind of, got my second break.
Which is really the first film that you had done that people really noticed, right? I mean, tell us about that then. How did Sebastian put it to you when he asked you to do the project?
And it was always supposed to be one take?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was. I think he mentioned the project, over lunch we were talking, and he mentioned that it was going to be that he was planning to do a low budget one take heist movie. And I at that point I didn't think that I could be in a position to ask, hey, do you want to maybe hire me for that? But as it turned out, my director, Anders Morgenthaler, on the 11th Hour, sort of told Sebastian, maybe you should talk to Sturla. And Sebastian had, seen the way we worked, that we were, we did a lot of long takes and improvised a lot. And it kind of fit to his idea of how we, wanted to pull off that one sequence film. And he also said later that he really liked the fact that I came from shooting a lot of documentary.
Yeah.
So yeah, we talked, and then my director Anders, he encouraged me to give him a phone call and asked if he had found a cinematographer for Victoria. And so I did, very nervously, and I called him, and he was very enthusiastic and invited me to Berlin for a meeting, and then just said, let's do it.
Mm-hmm.
Just like that. But how did you do it?
Yeah.
So what was prep?
Yeah. How in the world did you prep that?
It was obviously a big part of just putting everything together was finding the locations that we needed for the story in a certain a very small geographical area. So the scouting process was quite long, but once we found like an area that we thought could work, we just we said we would adapt the story, and we would figure out if there was any location missing. We would either have to build or come up with other solutions.
Mm-hmm.
And then we did a few test shoots, which were like more scenes, like 10 minutes and then 20 minutes, kind of short films.
Mm-hmm.
I think one way to convince the investors, but also to get to learn from that.
Mm-hmm.
And then we rehearsed, a full crew and all the actors, and rehearsed for 4 weeks, which we shot with the camera. So it's basically a shoot, a whole shooting process before we did the actual one takes. And this shooting rehearsals were, on location, and we lit them. And it was thought that this could be material for an edited film if, the one take idea failed. So,
wow.
And it was also, great for everyone to kind of learn their place and, where people could be and how it could be observed. And, it was kind of, everybody was rehearsing for it.
And you were operating?
I was operating, yes.
Yeah.
And our editor, Olivia, then cut, together basically a blueprint of the whole film.
Mm-hmm.
And then, from that blueprint, we could change things. We could write new scenes, take out. So it was a very interesting process, because basically the whole post-production or editing part of it was done beforehand.
Right.
So we could, change our mind with everything in a way before we went and actually shot the film.
Right.
And and we did 3 takes, and we changed things between each take as well to make things better. We, would write out the character or write in the location, and so it was
so you had
interesting.
3 different versions of the movie if you
Yes.
did it 3 different ways. Yeah.
Plus the versions that were
the
separate
cut versions.
scenes.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
But tell me, can you talk about how did you figure what the relationship of the camera to the actors? How did you figure out the shot, basically?
I mean, through rehearsals, you kind of I learned or got into my muscle memory somehow where the shot would be interesting or where it would make sense. But also we had this, concept that we wanted things to feel very fresh and instant. So there was no dialogue written for the actors. They were encouraged to never repeat their lines, from take to take. So they constantly had to keep the language fresh, and it was sort of the same idea with the camera work that I should react to what was happening, and rather than try to create that shot that I had in my mind, because I also knew that if I had this amazing shot that I wanted to get and I didn't get it, right. it would disencourage me, and I still maybe have 1.5 hour movie to shoot. So so it was more about accepting that every little mistake was now part of the film, and sort of embracing that. And Sebastian really encouraged us to think like that.
So were there big surprises? At times you must have been then reacting as if you were shooting a documentary, because you didn't know sometimes what the actors were going to do, especially if they didn't know their lines and they were making up lines. And
it was a lot shorter than the last time.
There is one particular moment where you can, if you look closely, you can see the actor doesn't know what to say and they're waiting to think of something. But,
it was a lot like shooting documentary, trying, and I think that the only deal I had with the actors was that they couldn't leave me behind, because they had to make sure that I was still around.
Right, slow down.
But we were also, both me and Sebastian were, communicating with them during the shoot. So we, we could, speed things up or get to the point or move on or slow down. Right. And so there was, a lot of audio that needed to be fixed.
Right. Well. Yeah, there had to be, didn't there? Yeah.
And why was it one take? Was it just to see if you could do it?
Yeah. Come on, why?
I think it's a longer explanation for that Sebastian can explain better than me. But as far as I remember it came up when he was researching to do this bank robbery film, and then sort of realized that the robbery itself is over in like 2 minutes. Like that's not where the drama is. The drama is like just before and just after. So then the idea kind of got born from like focusing in the right before and the right after, and we're not even showing the robbery in Victoria. And then I think that idea grew into, well, it would be kind of interesting if it was real time then, because we are actually only telling a story that happens, the hour before and the hour after a bank robbery. Yeah. So that's the why. That's the best why I can give.
We get the real time, but when we worked on 1917, which is also real time, though a bit stretched, but we did it with cuts. We did it with blends. Yeah. I mean, why not do it with blends?
We looked at Victoria when we were trying to figure out how to do it. We looked at Victoria, and it did make us feel like, okay, we're in a better position then.
We don't have to do
We've got blends, so it might work because it looks so hard. But anyway, sorry.
I think there wasn't like it wasn't like a proud moment where we're like, oh, we're gonna do this no matter what it takes, and we also looked each other in the eye and said like, okay, if we have to cut, then we have to cut, but I think it was important, at least for Sebastian, that we should be honest about it if we were doing blends or cuts. And it was an interesting discovery for me, like learning a lot about editing, shooting a film that has no cuts in it, because the edited version, had maybe a 10-15 minute sequence and then a cut, and then another 10-minute sequence and then a cut. And it was incredible to see how much the cut created expectations of the next cut in my mind as a viewer. Like That's a contract. When you cut, there's another cut coming. Then you define some sort of rhythm or some sort of sequence with edits, and that was.
I get that if you see the cut.
Yes.
I don't get that if you don't see the cut.
No, of course.
That's the thing. Yeah, absolutely. There's some films where, well, I don't need to have to mention them, I suppose, but say it opens with a very long 5-minute Steadicam shot, then you're kind of, it's going to be cut. There's going to be cuts afterwards, and your expectation is where the cut's going to come, isn't it? But I didn't get that with Victoria. Maybe because I knew going in that it was one shot. And I think what you're saying about it is also that it has a unity to it because all the actors everybody's doing the one take. So one section doesn't vary from another. It's all part of one whole. And there is something about that comes across, I think. So it's a really interesting process. I don't know where it would go because I don't know how many films really happen in real time,
It was funny because when we were doing 1917, it took a little getting used to because we were doing these long segments, but then we would watch a film on the telly and there would be cuts in it. And I remember one night turning to you and going, boy, that would be boring, because it was so great to really get into the flow of it.
I think one of the first films I saw after we finished working on 1917 was A Man Escapes, the Bresson movie. Camera doesn't move and it cuts.
Well, that was something you wanted
It's kind
to
of
see.
a big release.
But do you think like a film like 1917 would that be, with unlimited, resources, would that be able to pull off without blends even?
No, you wouldn't because of the different situations. Yeah. I mean, unlike being in a city and going into a dance hall and in a car and going around a block, we had
these really narrow trenches.
Right.
Some kind of monumental effects work as well. I mean, on-set effects work.
And quite frankly, with all the running and the rough terrain and everything, I don't think that the camera operators could have done it either.
No, I mean, with too many different systems we were using, that was the thing. Yeah. You must have had incredible pressure on you, though. I mean, doing that. I mean, you were basically handheld. What was it? What equipment were you using?
I shot it on a Canon C300, which is kind of a small camera that I've worked with a lot on the documentary work that I was doing. So I was quite familiar with that. And I just tried to make it as small and lightweight as possible. Did you
have a pistol grip on the camera?
It's just like a side handle, and then there was a top handle, so I sort of trained myself to change from the side handle grip to the top handle grip if I needed to run or do something where I needed to free my right hand or
Right.
And I had a great focus puller who was just pulling on with a small sort of follow focus. Attached to the camera, to the lens. There wasn't anything wireless. It's not even a wireless signal for Sebastian to see what we were doing.
Really?
Oh my goodness!
Wow. Oh, because we had it wireless up to the nth degree, didn't we?
Yeah, right.
We had wireless of everything.
Yes,
we couldn't. I mean,
And boy, before doing a take, you did have to make sure you didn't drink any water or anything like that, because that's a long take.
It's a long take, and I learned during one of the first rehearsals how important warming up is when we're doing this kind of take. So because we were rehearsing the kind of the escape where they're running through this neighborhood, and I just my legs just tensed up and I couldn't move after that. So that was a lesson. But otherwise I didn't feel like physically drained as one would think. I think it's the adrenaline is just pumping, and there's something when you put your eye to the viewfinder and look at an image, you just stop thinking like about your body. I can go through a shooting day without drinking or eating at all, because it just, you forget to, you're so focused. So I think that just kicks in somehow.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Yeah, of course, the extreme of that is the number of photojournalists, not cinematographers, but reporters with a camera that have been shot because there's a famous footage of a guy that was filming this border post, and a guard puts the gun up to his shoulder and shoots the cameraman, and the camera just falls down.
What?
The guy was dead, shot dead. Because you're so engaged in what you're doing, you don't recognize that threat is actually towards you.
Because you're looking at a frame.
So this guy filmed his own death.
Oh, that's terrible.
But anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to
really.
go. So
no, but I get that. It's because you're looking at a different thing than what's actually happening, or you're thinking about. It's strange.
It's a strange sort of disembodied kind of. I felt that on documentaries a lot. I mean, luckily I wasn't in a situation quite that extreme, but
also when you're doing like high car chases and stuff, and you're in a position that's close to the actual action in the cars. I know that I've been there and later been told you shouldn't have been there, but I was just looking at the frame, so it wasn't going to hurt me. But
it's
not
strange
necessarily.
Because I also feel like I'm not too comfortable with heights, but if I have my camera, then I don't think about it.
No, me too. I can't stand on a cliff, look down if it's more than 20 feet.
Yeah.
But I mean, I've been on helicopters hanging out on the outside on a sort of speed rail rig, filming, shooting into the helicopter, flying over mountains, and not thought about it, which is really weird. But anyway, tell us a little bit. How did you approach lighting, Victoria? I'm really interested in your lighting because it always feels so naturalistic, and I want to know if it really is and what you're doing.
What's your secret?
It's funny because my gaffer in Victoria, he was. We did this kind of workshop at Kammermarsch, and he was, he was complaining that he's constantly hearing that Victoria was shot with all natural light, and he said it's the biggest setup and the biggest crew that he ever worked with. So, but maybe scene by scene, it's not that massive. But when you're basically lighting a whole film and 15 locations or something like that in one go, it's a lot to handle. And we didn't really have the budget to do all that, so we were shooting out the one location and then moving on to the next, while the gaffer and his crew were pulling down lamps and then moving into the third location to set it up there, kind of reuse everything.
Wow.
But the approach was often, from need, that we kind of need, to light something because it's very dark it was very dark in this area in Berlin. So it was just trying to go with, what natural would be there, like enhancing street lights. We just put some power cans on top of buildings pointing down. I had art department build some billboards that we would light, so there was some natural sort of integrated in that environment, because we were shooting 360. It wasn't easy to put up any light units that wouldn't been shot. Another approach to create some sort of fill light, I guess, was we had HMIs on the top of buildings that would bounce off the building on the opposite side, so that would create like a huge sort of soft source that gave us, some exposure. But I also rated the camera quite high. I think it was 2000 or something. So I kind of gained it a lot.
Helpful, yeah. But when you put those kind of lights up that are basically you're putting up some film lights, then it's kind of dependent on the action and the actors not to change it so that you're looking straight at them, right?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, again, we learned a lot from the rehearsal. So I could change the lighting even, and learn from that this. I'm probably not going to see in that direction, and then we can have some light pushing through that street that we wouldn't necessarily see in the shot. And so it was a long sort of learning process through the rehearsals, also to be able to light it.
So I want to ask then, so we've seen a couple of films you did in Iceland. You did one straight after Victoria, I believe, called Rams, and then a year later, 2016, Heartstone, and they're both fairly different in the stylistic approach, your camera style, but the lighting, they both feel incredibly naturalistic. Can you talk about that? Can you talk about how those films came about, Iceland, and your approach?
You seem to have quite a connection with Iceland.
You like the cold, I guess.
Yeah, I do. I do have a connection to Iceland. I just shot another feature there. What was it? We wrapped in October. So during my art school years, I did an exchange semester there. So I was there for 4 months at the Icelandic art school as an exchange student, and I think I just there fell in love with Iceland.
So all those years of being at art college and film school and all that, they really paid off.
Yeah, maybe they did. I would think so. I like to think so. So after Victoria, I got a call from a producer, a friend of mine who I went to film school with. So there again, there's a connection to my education. And they were doing a co-production with Iceland, and that was Rams. I read the script and I really liked the story. I watched Grimur Håkonarson, the director. I watched his short film called Wrestlers, which was is a beautiful, beautiful short film that also captures a very specific, I think, visual identity of how he likes to, what his visual identity is basically. And I connected with that. I think that connected with my sort of Roy Andersson side of me, those tableaus. And so I wrote him some kind of love letter saying why he should pick me, and and he responded to that, and I got to do that film, which was very different, coming straight off Victoria, which was the 360 sort of chaotic documentary, big city feel, and then straight to the countryside in Iceland, like a desolated place, and we storyboarded everything, or we photoboarded everything on location, and had like a very specific plan for all the shots. So it was like the complete opposite experience in that sense from Victoria.
And you operated on that film too? Do you always operate?
I've always operated, yes.
Yeah. There's some lovely, lovely framing.
Yeah, it's really,
on that.
It's a stunning looking film.
Yeah.
We kind of watching it thinking, well, it must have been storyboard. It seemed, not that it seemed calculated, I'm not saying that, but it just felt so well presented. Yeah. And there were some very difficult things in it. So that was also something that led us to think, well, that
obviously
be interesting
was
how it was prepped. And what was your approach then to the look of it? Because you're dealing with the elements, of course, and small interiors, and so what was your approach in terms of lighting? And
this was also my first collaboration with a gaffer that I've worked with a lot since, and I think his name is Aslak Luthens, and his influence on the film is quite big as well. Like I hadn't, working on my first film, we didn't have a gaffer, and Victoria, which was lighting every set and kind of for one shot. This was a new experience for me in terms of lighting as well, and I really wanted to have this sort of naturalistic feel and a lot of soft lights.
Right.
and also be able to, to actually see the exteriors, to have texture in the exteriors while shooting interior, and finding that right balance was sort of a big, a learning process for me, where I got a lot of help from my gaffer, and since we had it so well planned out, I guess it was easier to figure out how we could light it as well, because we had photoboarded everything, and we could go through every shot and kind of come up and be more specific about how we want to design the light atmosphere. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So what kind of equipment were you using? I mean, what kind of lighting were you doing?
We didn't have, again, it was kind of a low budget film. So I think we had, couple of 4K HMIs and then M18s and KinoFlow. There was a small lighting package for that, and trying to just bounce things in through the windows and work very creatively with what little we have, and use of practicals as well, which I enjoy a lot.
Well, it looked wonderful. I mean, to the extent that you really didn't think it was lit. I mean, maybe a couple of things if you sort of think about it. Well, they can't be shooting out there in the middle of the night or whatever it is, But also there were quite. It was quite interesting that with very specific kind of weather scenes with specific weather in it. So how did you work around the weather? I mean, there's obviously the snowstorm at the end, but there's other scenes that seem like, well, did you wait for that particular light? Did you also plan your shooting day with the storyboards,
To a certain extent, we shot the first part of the film obviously in summer in Iceland, where the sun basically never sets. So we didn't really have nights, really, very, very, very tiny gap of nights. So obviously we had to plan around that. And then the second part we started shooting in, I think it was November for the winter part. And that turned into a second shooting period in January because there wasn't enough snow in November. So we actually had to stop shooting because we're doing a winter film and there wasn't enough snow. And I think we shot for a week and a half or something before it got too hard to keep hiding the bare patches with the tractor or doing silly tricks to avoid seeing that there's not a snowy landscape. So that was our main issue with. Otherwise, I think we were quite lucky with the weather itself, and even with the snowstorm. Like the first part of the snowstorm, when they kind of go up the mountain and it gets more and more windy, we actually ran into a snowstorm on top of a mountain. So that gave us a very authentic sort of visual idea of a snowstorm to build on for our kind of created snowstorm. That's kind of the second part of that sequence.
Right. Yeah. And how about the sequence where the boys gathering? Oh no, that's the other film, isn't it?
Yeah, Heartstone.
Let's talk about Heartstone.
Which is a very different approach, too.
Talk about the difference in approach, with Heartstone.
Because that was more fluid and moving. And
Heartstone was my first collaboration with Gudmundur, or we had done a couple of short films before. He got to do his first feature, and it's also a very low budget film but we somehow managed to scramble together, I think, 46 shooting days on that, which is a lot. Like I think normal is around 30 for a Scandinavian film, like between 25 and 30. So we had some kind of luxury of time in that film, and we did a lot of kind of tests in the beginning of how we wanted to approach it visually, meaning that we shot specific scenes with the actors in prep in different ways. Like, okay, let's do it on a 25, this scene handheld. Okay, now we'll try to see how the scene works on a 50 and static, and then that kind of led us to this more energetic handheld approach, which we both really responded to. And I think at that time I was also extremely inspired by Tree of Life, like just the light and the atmosphere of that film, and how the camera is always moving around these, especially the childhood part of that film I found extremely inspiring. So that became sort of a direction that we went in. And then, as I said, we had the luxury of time and of shooting in a small town for the entire shoot and having the cast available all shooting days, basically. So
wow.
when it comes to planning for weather and we could just change things on the day and go with the light and find the light and work with, it's raining today, great, let's do that scene,
Yeah.
So that was a real luxury that I have hoped to bring onto other projects, but it never really works like that, does it?
It's rare.
I think it was about the first film I ever shot in 1982. We had that. We had all these actors up in Scotland, at this location in Scotland. Director and I could have breakfast together and look at the weather and decide which scene we wanted to shoot.
Yeah, wow.
Which, of course, made him think this is the way it's always going to be.
Yeah, it's always going to be like this. I've never had it since. No way. Yeah, no, that's great. But, I mean, working with I presume most of the kids were not actors, or obviously they weren't that experienced. They couldn't have been. They weren't that old. So, I mean, the style of shooting and the way they must have been improvising a lot must have been that seemed to be a logical way to work, really.
Yes, they were amazing, and I think I was worried in the beginning, because I'm shooting on quite wide lenses and very close to them, and it's very physical.
Yeah.
And we also shot a lot of things, scenes 360. So there was basically me and the cast in a room, or they were very trusting in me. But Gudmundur had casted them from, I think he casted more than 1,000 children in that age in Iceland, which has a population of 350,000. So he went through quite a few of them.
Most of the population, yeah.
And then when he found his cast, he trained them basically for a year, where they would, meet every week and do different acting exercises. And I think he sent one of the boys to boxing to, become more self-confident, and so they were, when we started shooting, they were, very much, trained to be actors. Basically gone to school for a year to do that film.
Right.
So that was that was impressive what they managed to do there.
So did you? So really, you had rehearsed with the actors, and you knew what they were going to do. So a lot of it wasn't improvised then.
No, it wasn't that improvised.
Right. Interesting.
They were, they'd learned the lines months in advance, and they were so into the story themselves and so dedicated.
Right.
And we also did a lot of sort of photoboarding and floor planning, me and Gudmundur, of that film, but always trying to, to create this feeling of physicality and movement that the boys were, never, or the girls, they were never still. So we just tried to make that feel quite natural, and really worked hard on the blocking to feel like it was improvised or it just happened.
Right. Right. Well, it certainly worked. Yeah. No. It's
and wonderful. I think, lighting then for 360 is key to that as well. So you can move the camera in angles that you normally would, try to avoid because of that's where you put the light or something. I don't know. But I really, I think also from Victoria, I really like having that kind of freedom and maybe coming from documentary as well, like just exploring the scene and kind of finding the shots and finding the light. I really appreciate that.
And then you also worked with Johan Johansson, who we worked with on Sicario. He did the soundtrack for that. So when we were reading about it, and thank you for sending us the film because that was really great to see. When we were reading about it, it said that it was originally a multimedia show that was shown in Germany. What exactly does that mean? What's a multimedia show versus the movie that we saw?
We should say the film is called Last and First Men,
right.
so people understand what it is.
What we're talking about, yes.
Last and First Men. For Johan, this was always going to be, his feature film debut, or he was so passionate about creating a feature film about this subject, and I think he worked on this film for more than 10 years, from adapting the novel and doing all kinds of research and shooting all kinds of small test films.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously it's not an easy film to finance. And part of the financing came from, didn't come from the film industry, but it came from, I guess, music festivals or art festivals. So he kind of produced, or he was commissioned to do it as a sort of visual to live music concert. So that's what, I guess, the multimedia part of this story comes from.
It's a film and live music, or is it slides and live music?
It was supposed to be film and live music. So it had one appearance, I think, at Manchester Festival, which is, I guess, an art festival, where Johan was still working on getting the film Last and First Men finished, but screened some of the material to Tilda's voiceover and had a live performance. And I know that now they've, gone back and they've done a new sort of live version of the film that they're kind of, traveling the world with, and so where there's live music and there's visuals that are more accurate to the film version, if that makes sense. Yeah.
And then since Johan died, were you involved in the finishing of it?
Yes. Johan passed away, I think he was sort of halfway through making the music and hadn't finalized the cut yet, but there was a version of the cut that felt like he had found the film, if you know what I mean. So that was what we sort of decided to use as our guidance to finish the film. So basically, me and the editor he had been working with, he also edited a lot himself, and one of his closest musical collaborators kind of got together, and a sound designer, and sort of figured out, okay, this is the vision.
Wow.
We need to do what we can to finish that, because there wasn't any music recorded, and there was, I think the cut was more like 2 hours, and now it's 1 hour. So there was, a bit of work to be done.
Yeah.
I feel very kind of moved when I talk about it and think about it. It's a very important project to me. Obviously also because, Johan became a friend and then passing away so young and at kind of the height of his career. You work with him and his music is just divine somehow. And then seeing his kind of spirit and his whole sort of artistic capability come to life in this film is quite amazing.
It's a highly visual film. It's not linear or it's using an image to make you feel something completely different. It's not feeding it to you. You're seeing an image and you react to it. So it must have been really wonderful to find those images too.
That was also a really nice experience. And So these monuments are kind of scattered all over ex-Yugoslavia, so in the Balkans. And we drove around, I think, for 3 weeks, also just in a van with 4 guys, on the 16mm camera and some film rolls, and had shot one monument a day, and it was great. We were just looking for abstract images that spoke to us somehow, and these monuments, I mean, they're amazing. The architecture is just mind-blowing, and you don't believe it. It's like landing on another planet. That was an amazing trip.
I'll bet.
So
lastly,
let's talk. We were talking to Thomas Vinterberg a while ago,
which was such a pleasure.
We got to talk about Another Round, of course, which we think is quite a wonderful film. Tell us a bit about that, because again, that must have been very different again from the films we've been talking about that you did previously.
Yes, and I guess I'm happy we talked about Hearthstone, because that's how Thomas came to me.
Right. That makes sense.
Because we share on Hearthstone the same editor, Anne Österud, who's been working with Thomas, and then knew that Thomas was making Another Round and looking for a new cinematographer to collaborate with. And she suggested him, or invited him, into the editing room of Hearthstone, and he really responded to what he saw, and so that's how we kind of got to know each other, was through Hearthstone, and I think he kind of liked that there was this kind of free and sort of effortless camera in a way, and he was looking to go back to more of that kind of shooting style that he's kind of started out with.
Start from Dogma.
It
was funny. He said he started from Dogma, but he never wanted to go back there again. But there's certain elements of that. But it was a much bigger cast and much more complicated in the sense of the locations and the sort of flow of the story. I mean, Hearthstone has a strong narrative, but it's also very much about studying these young people and their relationships. It doesn't have a storyline in the same way as Another Round has, and it doesn't have that kind of sense of the absurd, but also the sort of pathos of the thing combined. It's a very interesting film, I think. So how did you start work with Thomas on it? I mean, what was your approach?
As I said, I think Thomas was looking to sort of go back to a bit more sort of a rock and roll approach, and he wanted a sort of a rougher expression, I think, and he wanted something a little bit different than what he's been working with on some of his previous films, I think. And he wanted to go back to, find some clear concept. Let's shoot everything handheld. Let's experience the scenes from one camera, trying, following the action rather than setting up a shot, things like that. He wanted it to flow and have its own sort of rhythm, I guess, that was, was a bit more energetic. And so that was, it wasn't, to be honest, it wasn't the easiest film to sort of get into, because it was also so open in a way, like how to approach the visuals, especially for me in the beginning, trying to, define, what it was that Thomas wanted and how it could be sort of original and, all these big words that was kind of laid out there. And I was, I still feel like, I'm in film school, and here's Thomas Vinterberg, wanted, to work with me, one of the big heroes, right? So that was quite intimidating to begin with. But then once we sort of got into it and kind of just realizing that it is more about, capturing the moments with the characters, the subtleties of, Mads Mikkelsen's character, and trying to really get that's it wasn't so difficult and conceptual all of a sudden. It's actually quite plain.
I think every film has a point like that, doesn't it? That you sort of start off with this kind of thinking that you need a big concept, and then suddenly it all sort of dissolves, and you go, oh yeah, well, just get the camera and we're going to do it. Now we know what we do.
That's true.
I must say, I did think towards the end of the film when Matt's kind of is doing his dancing number, I thought you were going to jump in the water with him or something, but you seem so in sync.
I think we talked about that at one point. So
that would have been cool. It was, again, it was a wonderful film, and I love. It's very successful from what you're saying. You and Thomas were trying to do at the beginning conceptually. It might have been hard to talk about it, but in the end, it had this sort of lightness of approach, this unpretentious kind of light feel to it that really helped the whole story.
Yeah, and I think one thing that was very important for Thomas was that it felt honest. That it was that, and I think that was basically the kind of the biggest key word that was on my papers, that it should feel honest at every time, and once you sort of have that one direction or that one word that you can always cling to, and does it feel like that, then it's a bit easier to navigate all the big concept thinking.
Yeah.
Could I just ask one question? What advice would you give? I mean, it's interesting. You spent a lot of time, as we've gone on about, film school and art college and that, studying, learning your craft and learning what you wanted to do with your life, really. What advice would you give to somebody in a similar situation? Because you come from somewhere that's very far away from the film industry, or seemingly.
Except it's also a small industry there, so
right?
In a way,
no, but I mean,
easier.
like Trondheim is not like it's not Oslo, even, isn't it? It's quite out there.
Yeah, I think I really appreciated all my kind of studying years, and it gave me a lot of time to develop my own sort of artistic sensibility, and basically just what I respond to, what I like, what my preferences are in film or in art. Or in the beginning, I was very concerned that I had to have a specific taste to be an artist rather than actually having a specific taste. So taking time to kind of develop that, I think was, and learning how to actually trust that what I think is right or good or or beautiful or poetic is valid. I don't have to try to copy someone or be something else. That it's actually, basically it's coming from myself, and that's fine. And I that's not maybe something that sounds very like it should, take 10 years to figure out, but it does. It takes a lot of time to just figure out. And and maybe I still haven't figured it out completely, and
but it would be pretty boring if you had.
Yeah, exactly. I think
that was the biggest.
I haven't figured it out.